Danny Wolfers is a Dutch musician, artist, animator, DJ, and writer known under his brand name Legowelt. His first release was in 1996, and soon after, he has released a number of quirky album titles, including Amiga Railroad Adventures, Loch Ness, Tips for Life, and Pancakes After Mist. At first glance, his electronic music and cartoons are playful, funny, and even interesting at times. However, Wolfer's art falls short into novelty, redundancy, pretension, and deep inauthenticity, emulating the work of Thomas Kincaid, but in the year of 2023. Why would such a harmless artist incite such feelings of dismay? Wolfers is a reflection of the current state of the electronic musician, his obsession with authenticity, and the estranged pursuit of many hobbies without context. The bourgeoisie have one thing in common, and that is they have an unlimited amount of free time of expression, production, and consumption. Profit is not a concern, but the bourgeoisie rely on the trust fund money they have access to and what they could spend it on. For Wolfers, being a traveling DJ simply does not equate to the living cost of his overabundant and expensive synthesizer collection, ranging close to $1 million, and then somehow changes hobbies immediately without repercussions of the cost spent on the hobby versus the profit, if any is made. I'll spare the details about Wolf's personal life, but I believe he suffers from petite bourgeois emulation and a derangement of extreme consumerism. He is a niche version of the bearded soy boy who collects Funko Pop dolls. Ownership of property does not equate to authenticity or knowledge whatsoever. The equivalent could be said about a book collector who merely organizes books by colors, but could be careless about the books itself or just not interested in reading the deeper context inside. The ownership of books rather means something through subculture and validates the hobbyist as a professional or a complex intellectual, when in reality, this is a misnomer. It's a facade to cover up the fact that the person is a excessive consumer, a member of the petite bourgeois class that uses capital to express power over the poor, and tries to mimic the behavior of the elite that once held the traditions that the consumer desires. Back in the 1980s, black people in Chicago and Detroit used to make electronic music. In 2023, a Dutch person is trying to resurrect a culture that doesn't exist anymore. And was Wolfers really an associate of an actual subcultural scene? Or is this rather just ironic posturing and novelty worship over consumer objects? Wolfers exhibits much of the latter. Being a DJ means playing other people's records while assuming that the listener understands that you must have a good taste in music and representing a sincere underground vibe. And that's what we are supposed to believe with Wolfers? Instead of diving into his offbeat and nonsensical music, it's best to look at his cartoons or art that has been influenced from Peter Max to the psychedelic era of the 1960s. I've been interested in this aesthetic too, and have incorporated Wolfer's aesthetic in my own work, Ludism, board games that will get you high. Wolfers reflects back onto my own art and makes me understand why would I think of names like Pizza Dog Studios or King Shrewd in a playful and ironic sense. Much of Wolfer's work is a reflection of the millennial generation and its own bourgeois escapism to try and find the hyperpop and experimental nature of Rhode Island's Fort Thunder. To understand what a fan thinks about Danny Wolfers, consider what a user by the name of Seema Sober on Wolfer's Discogs page wrote on January 8th, 2021. Quote, "What I really love about Danny Wolfers is that he's able to be and stay his authentic self, both as a person as well as a musician, producer, artist, and that this is very well visible and reflected in his music. And don't forget his drawings and website. In an age where more and more people are starting to look the same, act the same, and create the same, basically the same of all aspects of life, Danny is able to just keep on doing its thing without getting stuck into being tempted by trends, fame, or money. I find this extremely inspiring as an artist myself. I understand this kind of mindset. These sort of people are so rare nowadays, and we should cherish and respect those people and support them if you like what they're doing, of course. Even though his sound is not necessarily what I listen to, much what I listen to electronic music, I still dare to call myself a fan of Danny, simply because he's authentic. Unquote. Authentic? And 14 users found this comment helpful? This is the most misleading and misunderstood comment about Danny Wolfers. Seema Sober does not understand what authenticity really means and is likely coming from a biased or poor understanding that an interest in material hobbies and collecting is somehow a point of subcultural authenticity. One is simply not authentic if it means becoming a supposed Renaissance man and juggling a bunch of content creation activities until something sticks that makes money. Otherwise, Wolfers has a huge disposable income from a rich Dutch family. Average people with 40-hour jobs and dependent income cannot do what Wolfers is doing. Wolfers is rather a reflection of the common consumer and misled liberal artist of 2023. I would argue and say that Wolfers is chasing after fashion trends and pretty much is like everyone else. How so? The Phylopn company released a Wolfers version of their Tracker sampler featuring Wolfers art on it. I even own it and have access to Wolfers songs and samples. Tracker is a simulacrum of an Amiga 500 Pro Tracker interface and presented as a boutique hipster toy for collectors. Obviously, he was pursuing money in this, Seema Sober. I already expressed my concern with Polyend and their pursuit of inauthentic electronic music before in my article about the downfall of electronic music. Wolfers is also obsessed with the nostalgic trip of his own childhood past, or a lost future he cannot have access to. He can only dream in the same way Mark Fisher wrote about in Acid Communism. I only bring this Fisherian terminology up is because I too went down the same cliche path in art school, and I clearly see my own mistakes and zeitgeist reflection of following cultural and dead-end intellectual trends. And this is further projected in the work of Danny Wolfers. Now, let's take a look at a few examples of his art. First one, we have a faceless woman is playing on a Korg MS-20 clone in the forest near a car and a house. It is a common trend in the gear review community to play their synthesizers and drum machines near plants, likely an influence from Mort Garson's album Mother Earth's Plantasia. The second picture, we have, like Mark Rothko, Wolfers is obsessed with rainbows as a single color. The computer and plants is a reoccurring theme. The third picture, Wolfers' interest in technology also comes from a love for the Japanese, hence the Shinkansen, the bullet train, and the faceless Asian people I see, especially with the black hair. The fourth picture. The people could be omniracial, but they all have the face of nothing in the obedience towards its technological parent, exactly like the Asian spirit. The organic in question can coexist with the non-human kind. This means that you need an understanding of Timothy Morton and object-oriented ontology to understand what is going on in the theme of this. We have the fifth picture. A Eurasian futurism between Europeans and Japanese exists in this piece, as both are taking a Japanese bus into the forest. Europeans have blonde and brown hair, and the Japanese have black hair. Both groups use technology to improve upon their lives. Next one. The physical market exists here. Wolfers is expressing a nostalgic trip about the yard sale in nature and how objects mean something to people. Like Thomas Kincaid, who draws cabins in the forest, Wolfers feels good about drawing hypothetical situations where he can buy things as a consumer. And the next one. Here's another market of rainbow computers. The store itself becomes a temple or place of hospitality and inspiration. Consumption is the mood, like masturbation. And the next one. I'm not so sure what to make of this. It might be a joke on the band Heaven 17, but the corporations love profit, as it's shown on the calendar here, calculator here, and it's likely a feel-good feeling from Wolfers that he's associating a calculator with profit and business and something like that. And the next one, collecting vinyl records and window shopping, exactly like in the past, or practiced by a 1990s DJ looking for samples or dance riffs itself would be a Mark Fisher terminology of a lost future. Again, you have the faceless Asians appearing. Notice the bonsai trees in the back, so it's definitely Japanese origin. Again, I think there's an existential crisis about identity and trying to find authenticity through subculture here. Itself is, an act of Heideggerian authenticity. It's not really what Japanese people do. It's a projection of, I want these Japanese people to act this way. I want them to be artsy and interesting like Dutch people. So the next one, we have the clash of the European and the Japanese happen again here. And there's a black metal band of Eurocentric origin at the airport in Japan. So you have to ask, why would the Japanese be interested in such music? And I think it has something to do with the Group of Seven, or the G7, that colonizes countries to practice neoliberal capitalism and spread values of whiteness. If you're in G7, everyone is exactly Americanized and everyone has a McDonald's. And Japan is unfortunately a part of G7. And next one, we see another Shinkansen bullet train back and forth, another idealized Japanese society of perfect walkable communities, whatnot. So sometimes the European people worship the Japanese because they have an alliance with America and capitalism. Thus, Wolfer's interest in the Japanese is only a reflection of his own love for profit, consumption, and commodity fetishism. Thus, the Japanese become the commodity. They become the good Asians that advocate these American values, and they produce the things Americans want. They're supposedly, the biases, they're interesting and artsy. Wow, it's a very Gen X kind of thing. The next one we see, two bullet trains and the Japanese flag. So this piece is a worship of the country of Japan, of course, at the expense that Korea, China, Vietnam, Singapore, or Thailand is not cool at all. They don't have bullet trains, or they belong in the realm of outside of capitalism, anti-capitalism, while all of them are advocating some hostility towards globalism. So the Japanese were colonized, and thus they have to worship American imperialism and European interest. And so Wolfers is, again, projecting this. A little off topic on the next one, but you have a LARPer, and a LARPer is someone who plays the game of live-action role-playing. And originally coined by Larry Niven and Steve Barnes in the 1981 novel Dream Park. Now, it's actually said LARP, but its early origins are in that novel. The LARPing hobby has since become this kind of absurd act of theater and novelty, and people really don't take it seriously. It's kind of a weird queer thing. So here the characters play a role outside of themselves, and perhaps Wolfers is playing a character too, as subculture means you put on a costume. So it's a little meta here. They're having a costume and playing a game, and Wolfers is playing the game of the DJ, the Amiga musician, whatever that is, the electronic musician. I like this one a lot. So a hobby is a leisure activity done as a form of pleasure. And so the petite bourgeois try and emulate the mode of production of an artist, the elite artist. They learn through mimicry, or monkey see, monkey do. So in this case, a woman, another gag by Wolfers, the woman is the desired object, in Lacanian Freud sense, is messing around with vinyl records of the past and sampling them as a pursuit. Very postmodern meta thinking. While the expensive synthesizers are around her house with the plants and a living cat. There's something decadent about owning a cat there. And it's snowing outside. So you're having fun indoors, right? So in this dream world, one has to understand where money is coming from and how it can be used to buy these things, which do not correlate with the income. I mean, what is this woman working, and why is she spending her income on a cat, plants, synthesizers, vinyl records, and a sampler? Kind of weird, right? So I think this piece has to be the most similar to Thomas Kincaid with his fancy cottagecore cabins. The next one, this one is named The Genesis of a New Hobby. And stated clearly here, Wolfers is not shameful when it comes to the joy of consumption. You come home from your boring job, and in the mail, you bought some shit on eBay or Amazon, and it's there for you. And here is the next one. Here we have a man walking home with a plan. That's the title, Walking Home with a Plan. Did he just eat at McDonald's? And where is his middle class income coming from? What does he do for a living? And why would he assume that music making can churn a profit in return? And it goes to clearly show you in the next one that he works at McDonald's. And because that lower middle class income is going towards a $800 Akai S900 sampler and not rents, so it shows you this is kind of a dismal kind of private sector capitalism that makes everyone depressed with unibrow looking faces. Next one. While I could go on about Wolfer's misunderstanding of how an Amiga works, he does have an interest in Octamed, but writes Octamed version 3 here and not version 4, which everyone who uses Octamed uses version 4, not 3. So Octamed can create songs with greater track length and send MIDI, but it's not widely available for the .mod format, as that is for Pro Tracker. You should know that as an Amiga individual, but Wolfer's own album, Amiga 500 Tapes, is not made on an Amiga 500 or on Pro Tracker. And the album is entirely misleading. It's just sending MIDI messages to already expensive gear already. And this clearly shows Wolfers as a pretentious hipster. You're showing the object orientology obsession, but you're not. There's no. It's pretentious. It's hipster shit. So the next one. So the hipster attitude is personified in this piece called "Acquiring Information Before the Internet." It says right here how to make the perfect gabber kick. Again, Wolfers has never contributed songs in the .dot format, nor ever contributed to the mod archive, and he only really appeared around in popular music around 2009, way past when I Created Disco by Calvin Harris was released in the irony age of MySpace music of 2007. Wolfer only uses the Amiga computer as a sequencer under this influence of Calvin Harris as a means of authenticity. And he's not really being like Andrew Siga or Necros creating these like demo scene stuff. He wasn't really there in the mid 90s. And here, the next one, we have a fat man shamelessly eating potato chips and drinking Coca-Cola like a soy boy and consuming, what is that? He's got a big pink teddy bear in the corner, the plants again, the Oberheim $4,000 synth and Star Trek. Very concerning. Next one, we have another Japanese man presented here. It's something about Tokyo, the bonsai trees, Japan, Japanese people being special. You have another one with Japanese people doing the right Eurocentric thing here again. Japanese people, wow, they must like interesting stuff. And we got this last one where we have an interest in toy trains in our quirk by Wolfers. And there's this assumption of toy trains is that it's like a bizarre hobby, like building toy trains and creating landscape. But it can be absurd and nerdy, like collecting synthesizers and producing noise. So I thought that's an interesting tidbit about his toy train fascination. And so forth. I think this is a good survey of Wolfer's art in question. So in his last ditch of effort for producing music without care or traveling as a bum DJ, Wolfers decided to act upon animation and combine his art into a moving picture show. Here he is, animating. Now, his first animated movie can be described as, quote, Ambient Trip Commander is the story of Samantha Tapverston, a geeky young woman who lives a rather dull life in a medium-sized European city. She works a mundane job at a synthesizer store and spends her lonely evening playing RPG games. One day, she receives a cryptic email from a hacker group inviting her to Lonatel, a village secluded somewhere deep in the European Alps. As we follow her journey to Lonatal, things become more sinister and a grand mystery starts to unfold. At this point, it is safe to say that the medium of writing is the most superior art form. Cartoons, music, and performance can only go so far as to rely on aesthetics and subjective meanings from the fleeting viewer. These mediums in question rely on the logic and intellect of written thoughts in order to communicate an idea. Unfortunately, aesthetics falls short of sophisticated thought processes and intimacy, as shallowness in image becomes the priority. This is often confused as a form of beauty or intellectualism, when in reality it is an animalistic emulation and mimicry. Wolfer's written word, and in accordance to the picture show of Jim Woodring, can only describe the same mundane hobbies and bland pleasures Wolfers suffers from. The obsession of the woman as the protagonist could be a reflection of his own sexuality, his desire for something unimaginable like him, or his yearning to be desired as a woman that subculture and material gain could represent. The class analysis of working for a useless private sector like a synthesizer store is also a reflection of what happens during her free time playing RPGs, thus escaping reality. This stereotypical female fantasy of Fabio Lanzani rescuing her is apparent here, but let it be an authentic group of BBS hackers that Wolfers wished happened to be a part of. The Joseph Campbell display of the hero's journey becomes all too repugnant. Nothing original is ever said or done. We just have to watch these animated cartoons and suffer a sound collage of expensive modular Euro acts going nowhere. I really don't know what's worse in 2023. The utterly played out poser music of power electronics or the cutesy and ironic noise of Danny Wolfers. I don't think Danny Wolfers will be remembered as the next big thing, like he's next in line after Daft Punk. Far from it. His attitude and behavior is all too common with the petite bourgeois and post-millennial generation in an age of post-capitalist, post-scarcity economic society. Electronic music is a manifestation as a show and tell, or look what I can do with this expensive toy meandering. A similar act by the name of Aaron Funk fell by the wayside and went in debt through buying too many synthesizers and music equipment. And Funk was manifesting the art of Trevor Brown, avant-garde hate, and power electronics before electronic music took a turn for the worse and became a bunch of rich European kids celebrating a past that they never got to experience. Oh well. Now some idiot on YouTube is telling me that synthesizer is trans. Yes, your synthesizer is trans without peeping a word about or object orientology or the work of Timothy Morton. Well, what is Red Mean Recordings' argument in question? Quote, the trans agenda is literally just making cool shit and being cool, unquote. If that's the concern, then being cool is more important than being authentic. What is cool will constitute to poor consumer choices, Malthusian social control, and bad values to role model. This isn't about synthesizers anymore. And like Danny Wolfers, the so-called community of electronic music making is another cash grab to lead people off a cliff, just like what they did to board gaming and whatever capitalism touches. Wolfers acts upon feel-good emotions because that's what gives him joy in return. To simply draw a picture and emulate a vision, chemicals are released in the brain, so the artist in question does the same activity again. The hobby itself is like watching porn, where porn is watched solely for the act of masturbation and the creation of it requires ejaculation too. If this also constitutes as beauty, what's stopping someone from being a stoner, subcultural wise, or an average drugs user? Maybe lifting weights does create muscles in the body, but eventually the bodybuilder becomes a homosexual if he relies too much on the activity of muscle gaining. Would we ever take pride in this, our own sedation like this? I'm sure that's what powerful people want us to do. They want us subdued and passive so we can express ourselves in our own mediums. The medium becomes pornographic. I'm digressing, but this is the truth about Danny Wolfers and why his art, although ambiguous and excessive, fails to connect at any higher intellectual level. Wolfers creates an edible product which is consumed by the consumer and consumed by himself. I learned about my own previous artistic mistakes through the work of Danny Wolfers, making sure I won't repeat what he has done in style, aesthetics, and discipline. I pursue the truth, or as Ben Shapiro might say, facts, not feelings. This is Pilleater.
And originally, this article was published on www.pilleater.com or pilleater.substack.com on June 20th, 2023. And this companion video was released on the internet on June 21st, 2023.